You'll regret this day, Sarah Miller. My son gave you everything and this is how you repay him? Those were the last words my ex-mother-in-law, Vivian Parker, spat at me as I signed the final divorce papers. Little did she know just how wrong she was, and how her own demands would lead me to expose the web of lies her precious baby boy had been spinning for years. She was in for a big shock. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all started. I met Jason Parker during my sophomore year of college. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed to have his whole life mapped out. By our senior year, we were engaged, and I was head over heels. I ignored the red flags, the way he'd disappear for hours without explanation, how his stories sometimes didn't quite add up, and how he always seemed to come first in our relationship. "You're so lucky to have my Jason," his mother would tell me at family gatherings, her hand gripping my arm just a little too tightly. "He could have had anyone, you know." I'd smile and nod, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach. I should have listened to it. After graduation, we moved to Chicago for Jason's job at a prestigious marketing firm. I put my dreams of becoming a graphic designer on hold to support him, taking a job as an administrative assistant at a local insurance company. "It's just temporary," I told myself as I filed papers and answered phones. "Once Jason gets settled, it'll be my turn." That turn never came. 3 years into our marriage, I discovered the first lie. It wasn't even a big one, just Jason claiming he was working late when a coworker mentioned seeing him at a bar downtown. When confronted, he brushed it off. "You're being paranoid, Sarah," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Mark must have seen someone else." I wanted to believe him. I really did. Then came the mysterious credit card charges, the late-night calls he'd take in another room, the weekends away for work conferences that his coworkers knew nothing about. Each time I questioned him, the answers got more elaborate, more convincing. And each time I swallowed my doubts. "Marriage takes work," Vivian would remind me whenever I hinted at problems. "My Jason is providing a good life for you. Some women would be grateful." So I tried harder, cooked more, cleaned more, complained less. And all the while, the distance between us grew. It happened on our 5th anniversary. I had planned a surprise dinner at home. Jason's favorite lasagna, candles, the works. I'd even splurged on a new dress with money from the small freelance design jobs I'd started taking on the side. At 6 p.m., I got a text. "Working late, don't wait up." That's when something in me snapped. I pulled up our location sharing app, the one he insisted we use so he'd know I was safe, and saw he wasn't at the office. He was at an address in the suburbs, one I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I typed the address into my GPS. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in my car outside a cute little bungalow with a well-kept garden and a swing set in the yard. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel each beat in my throat. What was I doing here? What was he doing here? The swing set made my stomach twist into knots. A million possibilities raced through my mind, each worse than the last. Maybe it was just a friend's house. Maybe he was planning a surprise for our anniversary. But deep down, I knew. I knew in that hollow pit forming in my stomach. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, trying to steady my breathing. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of sharing dreams, making plans, building what I thought was an unshakable foundation. Now I was sitting in my car like some kind of stalker, praying I was wrong while knowing I wasn't. The minutes dragged by like hours. Each passing second felt like sandpaper against my raw nerves. The lasagna would be cold by now, the candles unlit. The anniversary card I'd written that morning, filled with promises of forever, sat on our dining table, a monument to my foolishness. I reached for my phone 3 times to call him, then stopped myself each time. What would I even say? "Hey, I'm outside the house where you're cheating on me." "On our anniversary." My eyes burned with unshed tears, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not until I knew for sure. "Please don't come out with another woman," I whispered to the darkening sky. "Please have a reasonable explanation." But the swing set kept drawing my gaze, an undeniable piece of evidence that whatever life Jason was living, it wasn't just ours anymore. I was still sitting there 30 minutes later when Jason emerged from the front door, a toddler in his arms and a woman, not me, by his side. He kissed her goodbye before putting the child in a car seat. My whole body went numb. The perfect life I thought we were building, it was all a lie. A complete and utter lie. I felt like throwing up. I was shaking with shock, rage, disappointment, disgust, and bitterness. It took every bit of willpower in me to not open my car door, race across to him, and I'm not quite sure what I would have done, but it would have been ugly. I revved the car's engine, and Jason looked up, his eyes widening with shock and horror as he saw me and the fury on my face. He lifted his arm half-heartedly to try and get me to stop the car as he slowly walked towards me, but I peeled away in my Ford Bronco at high speed. "It's not what you think," was the first thing Jason said when he walked through our apartment door later that night. "Then what is it?" I asked, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. The story spilled out in bits and pieces. The woman was Amanda, a former co-worker. The child, Lily, was their daughter. They'd been together before Jason and I met, but he'd never quite ended things. "I love you both," he said, as if that explained everything. "I never meant for this to happen." But it had happened. For 3 years, he'd been living a double life, husband to me during the week, family man to them on weekends, and business trips. I packed a bag that night and went to stay with my best friend, Zoe. "What are you going to do?" she asked, as we sat on her couch, ice cream melting in our bowls. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I know I deserve better than this." Filing for divorce was the easiest and hardest decision I've ever made. Easy because I knew I couldn't stay. Hard because ending a marriage meant admitting failure, admitting I'd been fooled. Jason didn't, really, not with the evidence I had, but he did ask for something that shocked me. Secrecy. "Please don't tell anyone about Amanda and Lily," he begged. "My mom, she wouldn't understand." Scream the truth from the rooftops. Expose him to his family, his friends, his colleagues, his clients, in fact, to the entire world. To completely and utterly humiliate and shame him the way he'd humiliated me. This chapter of my life closed as quickly and cleanly as possible. To be honest, I was ashamed. I felt I was a failure, even though it wasn't my fault in any way. It was as if I wasn't woman enough. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. I got to keep our apartment, which was always more mine than ours anyway, and my car. Jason got most of our savings, which seemed fair since I'd discovered he'd been supporting his other family all along. I thought that would be the end of it. But I was wrong. Very wrong. It started with phone calls from Vivian, worried at first, then increasingly angry. "Jason says you left him for no good reason," she said during one particularly heated call. "After everything he did for you, how could you be so selfish?" I bit my tongue. I'd promised Jason after all. Then came the emails, long, rambling messages about loyalty and commitment, followed by surprise visits to my workplace where Vivian would tearfully tell anyone who would listen about her son's broken heart. I blocked her number. I asked security not to let her into my building. I tried to move on. 6 months after the divorce, I was finally starting to rebuild. My freelance graphic design business was taking off. I'd redecorated the apartment, erasing all traces of Jason. I'd even gone on a few dates, though nothing serious. Then Vivian showed up at my door on a rainy Tuesday evening. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the apartment before I could stop her. She looked around, frowning at the changes I'd made. "He's struggling, you know. The divorce hit him hard." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, not entirely meaning it. Actually, not meaning it at all. Not a bit. "His company had layoffs. He's having trouble making ends meet." She fixed me with an accusatory stare. "He needs help, Sarah. Financial help." I was so stunned that I almost burst into laughter. I couldn't believe her nerve. "And you think I should be the one to provide it? Who else? You owe him that much, at least." "I don't owe Jason anything," I said firmly. "The divorce settlement was fair." Vivian's face hardened. "He gave you the best years of his life." "No," I corrected her. "I gave him the best years of mine." "You always were selfish," she snapped. "My poor baby boy is suffering, and all you can think about is yourself. You know what? People should know what kind of woman you really are." I gasped, and that's when I realized Jason hadn't told his mother the truth about our breakup at all. She still thought I was the villain in our story. Something inside me shifted. For months, I'd kept Jason's secret. I'd endured Vivian's harassment, the whispers from mutual friends who only knew his version of events. I'd done it because I thought it was the right thing to do, the kind thing. But where had kindness gotten me? "Vivian," I said quietly, "do you want to know why Jason and I really got divorced?" Her eyes narrowed. "I know why. You were never good enough for him. You couldn't handle a real man's ambition." I walked to my office and returned with a folder. Inside were the photos I'd taken outside Amanda's house, screenshots of text messages I'd found, bank statements showing years of transfers to an account in Amanda's name. "Your son has another family," I said, placing the evidence in front of her. "A partner of 6 years, a daughter who's almost 4. He was married to me while maintaining a whole separate life with them." Vivian's face went from red to white in seconds. "That's not... You're making this up." "Call him," I suggested. "Ask him about Amanda and Lily. Watch his face when you do." She reached for her phone with shaking hands, then stopped. "Even if this is true, why are you telling me now? Just to hurt me?" "No," I said, feeling a strange sense of calm. "I'm telling you because you deserve the truth, and because I'm done being the villain in a story Jason wrote." Vivian left my apartment in tears, the folder clutched in her hands. I thought that might be the end of it. I was wrong again. 3 days later, my phone rang, Jason's number. I almost didn't answer. "How could you?" he demanded when I finally picked up. "You promised you wouldn't tell anyone." "Your mother was harassing me," I said evenly. "She came to my home demanding I give you money because apparently you've been telling everyone I left you destitute." "That's not..." he started, then stopped. "Okay, maybe I exaggerated a little, but you had no right to tell her about Amanda and Lily." "Actually, I did. Your lies were affecting my life, Jason. I kept your secret as long as I could, but I won't be your scapegoat anymore." He was quiet for a moment. "Mom's devastated. She won't even talk to me." For the first time, I heard real pain in his voice. Not manipulation, not self-pity. Actual remorse. "I'm sorry about that," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "But maybe it's time you started living honestly." "You don't understand what it's like," he said. "The expectations, the pressure to be perfect." "No one's perfect, Jason. But there's a big difference between being imperfect and living a complete lie." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. There was no satisfaction in his pain or in Vivian's, but there was relief in finally standing up for my truth. Word spread quickly through our social circle. Friends who had distanced themselves after the divorce called to apologize. Others took sides, some with Jason arguing that men make mistakes, others firmly in my corner. Vivian, to my surprise, showed up at my apartment again a week later. "I owe you an apology," she said stiffly, looking older than I'd ever seen her. "I didn't want to believe, but I talked to Amanda. She confirmed everything." I invited her in, made tea. We sat across from each other like awkward strangers. "I don't understand how he could do this," she said eventually. "I didn't raise him to be... this." "People make their own choices," I said. "It doesn't reflect on you." She gave me a sad smile. "Doesn't it, though? Somewhere along the line, I taught him it was okay to lie if it meant getting what he wanted. I taught him that appearances matter more than truth." I didn't argue. Maybe she was right. "For what it's worth," she added, "I am sorry for how I treated you. I was wrong." It wasn't enough to erase months of harassment, but it was a start. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. A year after exposing Jason's lies, my design business had grown enough that I needed to rent a small office space. The building happened to be just a few blocks from Amanda's house, the same one I'd sat outside on that fateful anniversary night. I ran into her at a coffee shop nearby. There was an awkward moment of recognition before she asked if I would join her. "I've wanted to talk to you for a long time," she said once we were seated. "I didn't know about you, not at first. By the time I figured it out, Lily was already born, and I felt trapped." "I understand," I said, and I did. "We were both deceived." She nodded. "After everything came out, after Vivian showed up at my door, Jason finally had to face what he'd done. He's in therapy now, trying to be better for Lily's sake. I'm glad, I said, finding I truly was. Not for Jason's sake, but for his daughter's. He'll never be a perfect father, Amanda continued, but at least now he's an honest one. That's something. We ended up talking for ages. Not just about Jason, but about our lives, our dreams, the paths that had brought us to this moment. By the time we parted, we weren't exactly friends, but we were something. Two women who had found strength in finally demanding truth. Sometimes victory doesn't look like you expect it to. It doesn't always come with cheering crowds or decisive moments. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it builds slowly, in small choices and everyday bravery. My victory wasn't in exposing Jason's lies, though that was necessary. It wasn't in winning Vivian's apology, though that brought closure. It wasn't even in rebuilding my life, though I'm proud of what I've created. My victory was in reclaiming my story, in refusing to be cast as either victim or villain in someone else's narrative. Last month, I was hired to design the branding for a women's support network, a place where those who have been manipulated or gaslit can find resources and community. The director had heard my story through a mutual friend. We need someone who understands, she told me. Someone who can help others see there's life after betrayal. As I worked on their logo, a phoenix rising, bold and unashamed, I thought about how far I'd come, from the woman who ignored red flags to the one who designs her own path forward. I ran into Vivian again recently. She's volunteering at a family counseling center now, trying to help other mothers raise better men, as she put it. You know, she said as we parted, I used to think strength was about maintaining appearances, keeping things together no matter what. I was wrong. Real strength is what you did, facing the truth, even when it hurts. I smiled. The truth will set you free, right? Eventually, she agreed. But first, it makes you really, really mad. We both laughed at that, a genuine moment between two people who had learned the hard way that honesty, while painful, is always less destructive than deception. As for Jason, I hear he's dating again, but this time being upfront about having a child and co-parenting with Amanda. Small steps, maybe, but in the right direction. And me? I'm taking things one day at a time, building my business, making art that matters, opening myself to new possibilities, new relationships, but with open eyes this time. The other day, a new client asked me how I found the courage to start over. I didn't have a choice, I told her. Well, that's not true. I did have a choice. I could have stayed in a beautiful lie, or I could step into a difficult truth. I chose truth. And that, more than anything, has made all the difference. In the end, exposing my ex-mother-in-law's poor baby boy wasn't about revenge. It was about refusing to carry the weight of someone else's lies. It was about standing in my own truth, even when it was easier to hide. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't need defending. It just needs to be spoken. The rest has a way of working itself out, and sometimes when you least expect it, it leads you exactly where you need to be. Hope you enjoyed this tale. Have you ever had major issues over money, betrayal, or other events? Drop your wildest stories in the comments. Let's chat about it. And more importantly, let's learn from it. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more real-life stories you won't forget in a hurry.